If you've ever been to a Civil War battlefield, you've experienced the profoundly moving feeling of walking on hallowed ground. Whether it's Gettysburg or Chancellorsville or Vicksburg, these are places of haunting beauty where the outward serenity belies the unspeakable horrors that hover just below the surface. I had this experience just last week as we were visiting dear friends in Maryland who had just moved to the outskirts of the Antietam National Battlefield. And I was fascinated to learn the story of two Maryland brothers, John and Jacob Peck, who fought on opposite sides of the Civil War. The story goes that John, who served in the Union Army, and Jacob, a Confederate soldier, fought with their units against one another at South Mountain on September 14th, went home for breakfast with their family, and then returned to their armies and fought on opposing sides at Antietam 3 days later. Miraculously, given the unspeakable carnage of the deadliest single day in American history, they both survived. And apparently they even reconciled after the war. Although I would imagine that Thanksgiving dinner was still a little awkward. Division within families is painful enough when it's over politics or sports rivalries, but when it's over war or faith, it just cuts a bit deeper, which makes Jesus' words in today's gospel all the more jarring. Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and even life itself, cannot be my disciple. Actually, it's jarring to hear Jesus utter these words in any context. Why is the one who over and over again encourages us to love one another suddenly telling us to hate our family? Not occasionally disagree or get annoyed with, but hate. On the surface of things, it makes absolutely no sense. And we can't help but think there must have been some kind of mistake in the translation here. Surely what Jesus actually said was, whoever comes to me and does not love father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, cannot be my disciple. But Jesus, as he often does, is engaging in a bit of holy hyperbole here. He's being intentionally provocative in order to make a broader point. So we can all relax. Jesus does not advocate hating your mother, and in fact, you should probably call her. He doesn't advocate hating your siblings or anyone else in your family. The point is that in order to fully be disciples of Jesus, we must be willing to let go of everything else. Everything. Including the people in our lives we hold most dear. Because what Jesus is asking of his disciples is absolute loyalty. A discipleship so complete that every other relationship in our lives is secondary by comparison. It's also important to remember that as difficult as these words are for us to hear, they were even more provocative for Jesus' original audience. In biblical times, family wasn't just a group you'd gather with for Sunday dinner. Family was literally your social safety net. Family provided economic security. Family kept you from going hungry. Family was your retirement plan. Family was everything. And Jesus is telling the crowds that in order to follow him, they had to turn away from that which protected them and provided for them. The implications were both unimaginable and terrifying. Jesus even takes this to the material extreme when he says at the end of this passage, "None of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions." So all you need to follow Jesus, to be a disciple of Jesus, is to hate your family and give away all your stuff. Sign me up. But if this sounds impossible, that's precisely the point. The invitation to fully follow Jesus is only made possible through God's love and grace, which is quite a relief. But the point is to fully and faithfully follow Jesus is to be willing to give up the things that compromise or distract us from our allegiance to Jesus Christ, which means we must be willing to turn aside from any person, to give up any possession, to lose any status that drives a wedge between us and the God who so deeply loves us and wants us to experience the joy of abundant life in him. This doesn't necessarily mean that we have to give up the things that are most dear to us, our family, our prized possessions, even life itself. But it does mean that if they become obstacles to our relationship with Jesus, we must be willing to do so. And so Jesus invites us to examine the stumbling blocks that inevitably get in the way of our faith lives, and then to make a choice, to choose faith over that which is fleeting, to choose life-giving, holy habits over soul-sucking temptations, to choose life over death. To put this another way, following Jesus must be the absolute most important thing in your life. Being a disciple of Jesus, which is the whole point of the Christian faith, to follow Jesus, means putting him at the very center of your existence. Everything else must be secondary, including family and work and hobbies. Jesus must be your everything. And that's hard for those of us who find ourselves pulled in all sorts of directions with all sorts of loyalties and passions and responsibilities. Now, telling you that Jesus must be the most important thing in your life might sound self-serving, coming from a priest standing up in a pulpit on a Sunday morning. I get that. But I don't want you here because I like to see a full church on Sunday morning, although I do. But I want you here because when you sit in these pews and you hear God's word and receive the Eucharist, your life is transformed by Jesus Christ. And when your life is transformed by Jesus, you're able to tap into that deep well of hope that bubbles beneath the surface of the external trappings of your busy and overscheduled lives. That's what we live for. That's why all of this matters. We follow Jesus fully at the expense of everything else in order to be connected to God in a way that informs our lives and gives us meaning and purpose. So the real question for us embedded in this passage is, what's holding you back from following Jesus? It may be overwhelming family commitments or unhealthy relationships, or clinging to material comforts, or societal pressures to fit in by wearing the right clothes or driving the right car. Maybe it's the phone you reach for before you even get out of bed in the morning, or the endless scrolling that steals hours from your soul, or the sheer pace and volume of life itself. What are you willing to let go of in order to more fully embrace the life of faith? If our unwillingness to let go is what holds us back from truly living a life of peace, joy, and love, perhaps we need to reconsider the choices we're making and then recommit to the one who loves us without condition and without limit. The thing is, following Jesus Christ will change how you live your life. It will change how you spend your money. It will change how you interact with others. It just will. But rather than a burden, this is exceedingly good news. By reminding us that following him is more important than anything else, Jesus is encouraging us to rededicate ourselves to a life of discipleship, a life of following Jesus. Because when Jesus is your everything, you don't lose your life, you find it. In him, you receive life that is abundant and eternal and overflowing with God's grace and love.